I've really let go of the goal being excellence, and I think that is something to ponder. Somehow we still arrive at excellence, I have to say, almost every time. But that's not the goal, right? The goal is, for me, really like understanding, and understanding not just music, but like humanity, and the way that we're similar and the way that we're different and the things that make us unique. And if we kind of make that the goal, then I think we can access kind of more options.
Welcome to Pass the Baton, empowering students in music education. Here, we amplify the voices of music teachers around the world who are passing the baton and creating environments where the music students are empowered. Together, we can help students transform from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. I'm Catherine Finch.
And I'm Teresa Hoover. We are glad to be with you again today. So, Catherine, what did you think of today's guest? It was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And it's such an important topic to talk about and reflect in your own classroom and your own instruction. You know, are you being equitable? Are you providing an inclusive environment for kids?
Right.
You know, I want them to feel like they belong in my room, and big and little things that I do really, really matter, obviously. So
yeah, I feel like it's so important. And, you know, it's something that we've been talking about in music education a lot recently, just how do we create the spaces and how do we make our programs more equitable? And what I appreciated about Felipe was that he made it sound very actionable, and he made it sound very something that I could do. Sometimes I get overwhelmed when I hear about things that I can do to improve my classroom if it feels too big.
Right.
But I felt like he made it feel like it was like very achievable for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I heard him say shift, right? And that word of just like, it doesn't mean like throw everything away, just make this shift. And it can feel like a bigger shift, but it's just taking one idea or an old idea or a traditional idea and just making it so that it's gonna have more, give people more access to the curriculum or whatever it is, right?
Totally. Yeah. And the other thing that I heard him say over and over again was this idea of a student voice, which we've been talking about student voice, for years now. And it was great to make that connection as well. You know, he offered some ideas about how we can hear from the students more and how we can really help amplify their voices. It made me think about the one resource that we have, Catherine, that the post-rehearsal review, the exit tickets. And we talked, so some of the strategies that he was talking about is how we can help students share their voices in rehearsal. Check out those exit tickets if you'd like to give it a try. So before we get to today's interview, we want to remind you that you can support Pass the Baton and get awesome perks.
Join the coffee club for as little as $2 a month and unlock discounts, free resources, planning parties, and more. Check out the link in the show notes to learn more.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. We're so glad to be here with you. And we are so excited to have with us today, Felipe Morales-Torres. Felipe, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we had several different people recommended we talk to you. So I'm very excited that we were able to make this work.
Me too. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and I wonder if we could just start with you kind of introducing yourself a little bit more and telling us about your background and your current role. Sure.
So I'm currently the assistant director of the Bornoff Foundation for the Advancement of String Education. It's a long name. We go by FACE, though, F-A-S-E. The organization, we provide resources and support and training, a lot of training, to string teachers, both around pedagogy of string instruments, but also inclusive classroom practices and kind of larger frameworks and philosophies and those kinds of things. And I was a school teacher up until 2022. I taught all of the grades, 5th grade through 12th grade, strings and full orchestra. And full orchestra is actually my specialty because I have grown up playing the viola and continue to play the viola, but I have a performance degree in the bassoon somehow and quite randomly. And so, full orchestra is kind of my niche where things really work. I've directed one of the youth orchestras for the Cincinnati Symphony coming up on 10 years. And I'm originally from Miami, Florida, but I moved to Youngstown, Ohio during high school, and I'm not sure I would recommend that to most people. But it is how, I was able to end up where I'm at. So kind of grateful for that journey. And yeah, so that's kind of my history.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And I think that's great that you have such a neat experience in both the band world and the string world and can combine that for full orchestra. It's just a wonderful skill set.
Yeah, I don't know why the bassoon made sense to my brain, but it did.
Yeah. Recently I had to, this is kind of like a side tangent, I had to kind of relearn some oboe and bassoon, and I found bassoon, I did pretty well. I was pretty proud of myself. It took quite some time.
It's kind of easy to start. I think hard to make sound nice.
Oh yeah. No, I didn't get beyond like a B flat scale. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But okay. So one of the other things I heard you say when you were talking about Bornoff was this inclusive classroom practices. And that's kind of why we wanted to talk to you today about this idea of inclusivity, equity, and all of that within music education. This is something that is on a lot of music educators' minds these days and every day, really, but we were hoping that we could have that conversation. So I guess before we kind of dive in, maybe could you give us some like almost definitions? Like how do you view those words, like equity, inclusion, things like that?
Sure. There's lots of ways to look at it, right? Lots of different ways that this acronym shows up too. You've got DEI, DEIA, IDEA, all kinds of structures. And then DBIE, right? We're throwing the belonging aspect into there. And I do think those 4 components plus access are all somewhat distinct, all somewhat important, right? It used to be we really focused on access and accessibility and only that word. And I think the reason we needed to expand that is that we just were focused on providing an opportunity, right? Like, here's an instrument, I've given you access, what's wrong now, right? Was kind of what was going on. And so we've started to learn over the last, many years that just having the opportunity isn't enough, right? In some cases, we need to feel that sense of belonging. We need to have those supports that actually put us on equal footing with some of our classmates, right? Who maybe have access to private lessons, who grow up in musical families, right? Who are not having to take care of siblings after hours, or who may not even have a home, right? And then, yeah, so we're just kind of expanding our understanding of what really students need and all the different types of things that students need. Physical things, opportunity things, emotional things. It's all kinds of supports wrapped up together. I don't know if I gave you concrete definitions.
I mean, I don't know that there are concrete definitions.
I don't think there are.
But your way of describing that, yes, that I think that gets us in a good spot where we're kind of all on the same page. So
great.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So go ahead.
Well, yeah. So then I guess now you put music education in the mix. So what I guess you were kind of talking about that with instruments and opportunity when you're talking about access. But so I guess what does that mean for us in music education?
Yeah. So I think understanding that there are many different types of needs, right, in order to succeed, whatever that means, implies that there are also many different angles that we need to be approaching things from, right? So and you can almost view it as kind of like a ladder, right, or a spectrum or an ecosystem, depending on the imagery that works for you. And so first of all, there does need to be that opportunity, right? So if you're a child in a school where there is no music, right, you don't have access. You certainly don't have equity, right? So there needs to be an opportunity. And then once you have the opportunity, right, the access part, is that opportunity relevant to you, right? Is that opportunity sustainable, right? Can I do this class and show up as myself and be excited by this class and empowered by this class to do the things that interest me or to learn about things that could be interesting to me? And does it require things that are reasonable to me in my life and my situation, right? So, for example, when I taught in my first orchestra program, we were a Title I school, like over 94%, right? Like, you know, below the poverty line. And so one of the small ways that we improved access, right, was of course to expand the inventory of instruments at school. But then also 30 days into students beginning strings class, we had the quote unquote first recital, right? And it was actually during the school day so that 100% of the kids could come, right? So that the parents who work third shift, second shift could come during the day and have lunch with their kids and see them in their recital. And then we would record that and send it home, right? So it was just this small thing that kind of shifted that traditional expectation of like, you have to show up after school, you have to have transportation, you know, you have to have the specific clothes. We didn't have a requirement, right, in terms of attire. And yet the kids showed up dressed in like literal mini ball gowns and like tuxedos because like, you know, there was a lot of Latino culture. And so you had this whole like quinceañera vibe. It was absolutely amazing. So, you know, understanding that we needed to provide the opportunity and then tweak kind of the structures, right, to make it relevant, to make it sustainable for the students is a first step, I think.
That just makes me smile thinking about it. And I think that's such an easy thing to do, right? Have the performance during the school day, record it, send it out. And that way, not only are you making it equitable for the students, but for the families too. Mm-hmm. Because what parent doesn't want the opportunity to see their child, but that just depending on when you have that performance, they might not be able to. So I think that's really big. I heard you say a couple different times you used the word relevance. Mm-hmm. And talking about is what we're offering, are these opportunities relevant to the students? And I'm making a connection in my mind because, you know, before we started recording, we had talked a little bit about this idea of siloing and how we tend to do that. I'm guessing there might be a connection between how we think about, are we making these opportunities relevant, and this fact that we often tend to silo ourselves into these boxes. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact of the matter is music education hasn't changed all that much since it became a thing here, right? We teach band, we teach choir, we teach orchestra, we do a lot more general music nowadays, right? We have some technology going on, but the general thing that is music education has been the same for like a couple hundred years now. And but the people are not the same, right? We are so much more intercultural. We are so much more modern, right, in different ways. And I don't know that we have caught up to that, right? So while there is, I mean, I'm a symphony guy. Like I love the symphony, right? And there is so much value in continuing those kinds of traditions, and providing opportunities for that kind of music. Even I still wonder, right? Like, what are the other things that we could or should be doing that are relevant today? Something I've been grappling with recently for myself, right, is that I don't know if my music education actually prepared me to be musical outside of an orchestra.
Mm.
You know, it's not convenient to need like 60 people to do the music that you know how to do the best. And so even at that baseline level, like, we talk about preparing kids for lifelong musicianship and all of these things, but are we teaching them a kind of music making or musicking that they can actually do, that they want to do in real life? And even me as an adult who loves music, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I have to say, so I went to the Illinois Music Ed conference last weekend, and there was one session that I'm thinking of that talked about hidden curriculums, right? Like just things that we don't necessarily think about, but what are we telling our students by what we teach them? And that's a great one that you just brought up, right? And so that's just I think another great example of like another shift kind of that you're talking about. You took the program or the concert and put in the middle of the day because that would help more access for more of your families and students. Maybe rethinking curriculum and what messages am I sending that I know or don't know, and that could be a great place to start too.
Absolutely, right? Because a violin doesn't only show up in a symphony, right? Mm-hmm. And it has so many applications outside of that world. And to me, they're all just as valid, right? But unfortunately, we still tend to say like the concerto soloist is better than the bluegrass fiddler, when they probably play at a pretty equal technical level. And this person over here can improvise, they can memorize like endless numbers of tunes, jump in on a whim. So, we can also start to rethink like what is musicianship, right? And what does that look like today and for the people that we're teaching? And another personal example for me, right, would be that I grew up in a Cuban Peruvian family, right? My literal family parties involved percussion instruments as a child, and my mom, used to study folk dance. So I grew up with these other kinds of music in my home. And then the minute that I started my formal education, that kind of disappeared from my life. And so not only did I not get set up to do music kind of outside of the orchestra, but I was separated from the music that I was born with and raised with, right? And that, in some ways, depending on how I'm feeling on a certain day, that sometimes feels traumatic, right? It feels, Tanya Smith refers to a similar phenomenon, but more with like nature as a trauma of separation. Right? And we could be doing that more often than we realize. It's not really an area that has been studied from that particular angle.
I feel like if we're not careful, we do that in so many areas of music education, just by the way that we think about things as being right or wrong. Well, this is the right way to hold the instrument. This is the right way to play this passage. This is the right way. And I don't think we're doing it intentionally, right. But I think that comes out. And I think that's something that a lot of us music educators almost have to unlearn, because that's how we were taught, right? I was taught, I went to piano lessons and she told me the right way to do it. And if I didn't do it that way, I was not correct. So I think we have to, as music teachers now, kind of help ourselves like be more open to the idea that there are many ways to do music. Yeah. And it doesn't just have to be what we learned.
My high school bassoon teacher, right? Remember, I started the bassoon in high school, so I was behind. And so he had this really lovely metaphor. His name was Dr. Bill Bio. He used to coach basketball, and he would say, as long as you're making baskets, why would I, mess with your throw? And so there are levels and nuances to that. But he used to use it sometimes because I was developing like a weird way of doing vibrato, right? Like I was using my jaw and It was just not your typical thing. But I was really good at it. Like, I was really good at doing this job vibrato. And you know, he's like, if you pursue this like professionally, they're going to tell you something about it. It sounds beautiful. And so, you know, who's to say that that is not the right way for you and your body, right? And that is such a foreign concept for us sometimes when we've been brought up in this particular tradition, right, which really values proper technique, healthy technique, right? We sometimes disguise right and wrong as healthy.
Yes.
And sometimes it is healthy, and sometimes it's just what we do. And but that idea of being right for you and your body really is a much more indigenous concept, right? Mm-hmm. It's a different cultural frame altogether.
I mean, it's such a smaller, different thing, but like, yeah, I teach ukulele with the younger kids, and it's like, I'll tell children, like, you know, the right-handed ukulele is kind of just the most popular one you're going to pick up. And I've restrung some for left-handed kids because I've kind of just decided, well, there's lots of people out there that have made it really famous with a left-handed guitar, or, you know, or left-handed percussion or drum kit. So like, who am I to say you can't, you know? So I just kind of let them know, if this truly feels better, you just have to know that when you go pick up one, you're going to probably have to restring it yourself, or tune it, you know, just know that. But if it feels better, that's what you should do. Right. So.
Yeah. And I think if we open ourselves up just a little bit, right, in that way, we also make our classrooms more inclusive for the students who have different physical abilities, right? Mm-hmm. Because when a student who maybe is physically, you know, different, right, hears us saying, well, this is the right way to do it, mm-hmm. and this is the way that you have to do it, right? And we emphasize it like that, you know, some messages come out, right, that kind of reinforce that feeling of otherness for that student, of difference.
That's such a good point. Just to make it seem like it's this big deal for you're going to play it this other way. You're just emphasizing that disability, and that's sorry. The wheels just keep turning. So sometimes I'm like, I don't even know where to go next. What I appreciate that I'm hearing from you a lot is about this idea that we want the students to continue to be musical, and it's not just a matter of what they do in the classroom with us. And that's kind of a big part of what we talk about on this podcast, with this idea that students can take ownership of their music making, and they can really, it can feel like it's theirs and not just something that they have to do with us. Can you talk a little bit more about how you see thinking about equity, inclusion, belonging, and all of that contributing to the lifelong musicianship?
Sure. So, it especially in terms of ownership, right? I'm gonna circle back to the idea that, right, at a certain point, my music education, because it was fairly narrow, like separated me from my culture, right? Which is nothing anyone intended. It's not anything anyone did on purpose, and you know, I never felt personally stereotyped, right, like in any of my classes. And I attribute that probably mostly to the lightness of my skin, right, and the fact that I grew up bilingual, and I am a U.S. born citizen, but my parents are immigrants. So there's lots of layers of privilege here. But you know, one of the frameworks that really helps me is the idea of culturally sustaining pedagogy. And in sustaining pedagogy, there's a nuance versus responsive pedagogy. And that's that students, first of all, have a right to access like their heritage music, like their ancestral music, you know, and I'm not saying that has to happen in your classroom. But I can tell you from my experience that if it doesn't, chances are high that it's not happening, you know, somewhere else, right? Because I grew up with international parents, and it fades over time. As we get busy, we are working, all these other things. So first of all, we should try and provide opportunity to access that kind of heritage music. But If we're only focusing on the past version of that music, on the tradition, on the history, then we're really just doing the same thing as our everyday music education, which is learning how to reproduce and interpret classical music, right? So the element of sustaining speaks to having the agency and the opportunity to actually transform that music or to contribute to that music, right? So I'm learning about my heritage, and now me, Felipe, in the year 2025, is learning how to process that and do it in a way that is relevant to me, right? And I'm not here to tell you that I have that figured out. Like, I really don't think I do, especially not as like a strings teacher. I feel like we're very, very behind, like in our particular corner, when it comes to culturally sustaining pedagogy. But there are some really beautiful examples out there, right? So the McPhail Institute, for example, in Minneapolis, has a program where students learn the Hmong language and then write contemporary pop songs, like in Hmong, right? Where they're also kind of learning about the cultural attire, and they're kind of vamping on that. And they produce these like modern little albums, right, in their heritage language, but about their experience today. And there's something really beautiful about that. I think it's kind of the right note. I think about this beautiful performance, and I'm forgetting the school's name. I'm so frustrated by that right now. But it was a mariachi performance at the Latino inaugural in 2021. And I don't know if most people know that there was a Latino inaugural happened online. And if you look up Mariachi Latino Inaugural, you'll find this beautiful performance of This Land Is Your Land, right? And the students play a bilingual mariachi version of this traditional American song. They insert like a speech moment. They're wearing their traditional trajes. It's just like a really gorgeous example of that sustaining element, right? Where we're taking that heritage music and we're blending it with our current identity, right? As in their case, Mexican Americans. So I think that's one area that we can find some student agency and control. And we also need to recognize that heritage music doesn't necessarily resonate with every child who is going to have a culturally diverse, ancestry. There's actually some research that says if a student identifies with a group that is overly stereotyped in their community, engaging with that kind of direct culture content can actually contribute to academic regression because it's triggering. They're like experience this stigma at school, and here I am having to be that thing that is stigmatized, right? Boston University did a really great PD session on this last fall, and one of the presenters shared a study of Asian American students who just felt really othered by learning, traditional Asian music. They were like, I just want to do rock orchestra like everybody else. So that brings me to the point, like, we can't make assumptions about what students want, right? And what would interest them. And that education is really a dialogue, right? The whole way through, like in the planning process, it should be a dialogue. In the execution process, it should be a dialogue. And on the back end, like, it shouldn't just be like, well, that's our last lesson, best wishes for the future. I think we really gain a lot by continuing a conversation of, what are you interested in doing? How is it going as we're doing it? And how did it go? Where do you want to go next? What should we change?
Yeah.
That's such a big a big piece, like the student voice piece is necessary. And it, like you said, it needs to be there throughout the whole thing. Sometimes we've talked about like people who will ask the question at the beginning, but then never come back to it throughout the rest of the experience, the project, whatever it is. So we have to not only ask the questions, have the dialogue, but put something in action and then take the time to reflect with the student afterwards.
The actual student's voice is so important, right? And I think about how many rehearsals have we been in or observed or even led where we never heard a student's voice, even once in that rehearsal, right? And that is such a fascinating, like even a visual metaphor, right? Like I put a bassoon to my mouth, my voice is literally silenced. Right. So if I don't have an opportunity to speak or to sing, like where do I get to use that in this process? And so some of the things, since I know we're kind of looking for practical applications, one of the things that I really love to do is I start every rehearsal with a social warm up. And so it's not, musical or mental even. But it could be a random question of the day that students have to discuss with a neighbor, right? It could be, I love the framework of like wins and losses or rosebuds, thorns, right? As a way to get kids thinking about and sharing what's going on in their lives, and I'll model that myself first to help them realize like, yeah, it's okay. It's safe to do this kind of thing in rehearsal, right? Hey, these were some of my things I'm excited about this week. What is somebody else excited about in the room? And that just is a moment for them to use their voice to share and be a person who has a life outside of holding the instrument in the ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
That's so important. And every time we talk about the idea of students not talking during rehearsal, I think back to there's a book or a method or whatever about the pin drop quiet rehearsal, and it's like a classroom management type book. And while I get it, it also just makes me cringe a little bit because I don't want it to be that quiet. I want to hear what the students have to say, and I want them to tell their neighbor what they have to say, and I want them to feel like what they think is just as important as anybody else in that room. Yes, there are moments where we do need to be quiet and play our instruments together, but that's if we get too much focused on this fact that it has to be silent all the time, we take away the opportunities for the students to start to share who they are and learn about who else is in the room with them.
Yeah. And I think the irony is like, if you embed it and do it more, it actually becomes more efficient, right? Like if you never do that kind of thing and you're like, let's do a conversation today, you're going to lose 20 minutes.
Yes.
Easily. Yep. Like, but if you just do it every time or every day, then you have the option in the middle of class, in the middle of rehearsal, to be like, okay, this is going on musically. What do we think about it? Turn to your neighbor and discuss. Let me hear some ideas. And that process can take like 3 minutes, if they're practiced at having the conversations.
Right. And taking the time to practice is so worthwhile because then you get to this beautiful spot. Yeah.
And something I was thinking too is when you're trying to think about some of this work and like, what do I do? We talk about teacher for music educators. It's so hard to give up some of the control. But I think also we forget we have got all of these faces, all of these people in our room with us. And if we start, like you were saying, like if we start having conversations with them, we start to learn so much about them. We also can have them help us make the next steps too, right? Like we don't have to have all the answers. Somebody else is going to speak up and say, what about this? Or can we try this? And so I have to remind myself when I feel like I have to take a big step or something. I have all my students in front of me that can help me and should help me. Like you said, right? It's a process of all of us together. So So it doesn't have to feel like such a big thing sometimes, even though it does. But
Right. And there's so much more buy-in also, right, when you give those opportunities, because just sitting there being told what you're playing incorrectly isn't a very, I mean, why would I like that, you know?
right.
But if I had the chance to like think, give my opinion, you know, even just like commiserate about how hard this particular section is, like in the moment, right? Like that's a different, like I don't feel like isolated in that
Mhm.
kind of experience. I had a colleague here in Cincinnati who tried a really cool thing, and that was where, you know, they'd be rehearsing, and when they would stop, students were invited to just kind of like stand. They would like, you know, like Pop Goes the Weasel, and in order, like they would uh, give a comment to the group, and there were some frameworks around that, right? Like I think it had to start with like a what sounds good, what can we fix, that kind of stuff. Um, but it was a way of democratizing the actual rehearsal process, you know. Um, and another one that I heard of, and it's on my list to try, is, you know, I think it came from a professor at Butler. Oh shoot, I'm sorry, I'm so bad at names. Um, he would pass out slips of paper, like just kind of have slips of paper on stands. Now you could do that with like a QR code, I think. But and just have the kids be like, okay, these are the spots that I need to work on, and this is something that I need to fix on this spot. And that became the rehearsal plan, like the next day, right? You could even do it kind of like drawing out of a hat. These are the things we got to work on.
Yeah.
I've done that with students like on the board around contest time, right? Like what's going on? What are we feeling really strong about? What are things we definitely need to clean up? And just that process of being able to have ownership of the experience, I think really changes things.
Yeah, we've talked about that kind of idea a couple times with just like ask the question. What were you really proud of? What do you think needs more work, either individually, your section, or any of that? Because you learn so much.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't always know what's going on in the third clarinet section. I might try, but I don't know. Right. And we can ask that question and just learn a lot from our students. So
it takes so much pressure off us, right? As the teacher, it's such a hard job.
Yeah.
And so why not like relieve some of that?
Yep. I've even had like you work on that process with kids so they feel like they have a voice, they're seen, they're heard, they're part of the process. And then you even get to the point where someone, you know, a student will say, could I offer a suggestion? You know, and like they're just, and you're like, oh my goodness, yes, please. And I guess I think too that that's another place that you might move forward a little bit by hearing somebody else's perspective of like, could we never try it this way? Could we do this? Or, you know, there's a great opportunity there when kids feel like, you know, they can offer even a larger idea to the group. So
definitely. Yeah. And I feel like these are things that we can embed really early as well. So part of the thing that drew me to the Bornoff approach, which the foundation specializes in, is it has this emphasis on flexibility, right? And so whereas like in your traditional string approach, we might only do like D major for like a year, maybe two, you know. We don't do that, and kids are learning, you know, 2-finger patterns. They're learning multiple bow strokes. We're doing things that most people raise their eyebrows at in like traditional string pedagogy, but the joy is so high, and then the kids have these tools that they get to experiment with and learn how to apply right from the very beginning. Even something as simple as like, I want to practice my open strings 5 times each, right? Like those small choices that we can embed early can really become bigger mindsets down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that we haven't asked you about that you think would be valuable in terms of all these ideas of equity, inclusion, lifelong musicianship, all the things? Is there anything that you think that the listeners need to hear before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think so the thing that is on my mind, right, is just how can we break down these like lines between our ensembles, between our disciplines and our traditions. Um, I grew up my whole life also singing, and I have never been in a situation where somebody has encouraged me or taught me or even allowed me to play a viola and to sing at the same time. Right. And I think that's sad. I don't even know how to really do that. They've been separated so long. Um, but then if we look at like the people out there, like the musicians out there who are really exciting, who are doing really cool things, Abel Selashow, for example, on the cello, who's mixing his South African heritage with the cello and singing and vocalizing and doing rhythms. It's so exciting. Layla McCalla doing something very similar with her Haitian heritage. The Sista Strings have an incredible version of Lift Every Voice and all kinds of amazing original songs where they're singing and playing and doing multiple kinds of music at the same time, right? And I think for me, I've really let go. I think, and maybe this is a little bit dangerous to say, but I've let go of the goal being excellence, and I think that is something to ponder. Somehow, we still arrive at excellence. I have to say, almost every time, but that's not the goal, right? The goal is, for me, really like understanding not just music, but like humanity and the way that we're similar and the way that we're different and the things that make us unique. And if we kind of make that the goal, then I think we can access kind of more options. And that's the horizon for me, right? I want to really learn how we can do strings and singing and percussion or anything all at the same time. And I think that's what's next. And technology. So one of my classmates at Boston University said yesterday she thinks that music literacy can now include coding, right, and programming. And I think that's so true. It doesn't, well, we don't just make music on acoustic objects anymore.
I'm gonna keep that idea of excellence in my mind because that, and I think I've been in a similar spot recently. I haven't been able to articulate it quite as well, but the goal isn't perfection. The goal is that we truly love music making.
Yeah, and I think we still arrive there, though. Yeah. We can have fun and be good at our instruments, and we can chit chat and still be productive. And things don't have to be sequenced, 1,000% exactly correctly, and it'll still work out. I got to see Lysandra Booth do a really fabulous. She goes by Lysandra Belcher now. That name I do know. She did a fabulous presentation in Washington in like 2023, I think. And her session was called Beyond Equity, and she made an excellent case for equity. Really is just the baseline. Right? Like if students don't have that opportunity, the supports to make it relevant and sustainable, you don't have education, right? So equity is just the baseline. The real goal is liberation. And that has always supposedly been the goal of education. But somewhere along the way, we kind of lost that, I think. And to me, liberation is about creating a space, creating an experience where students, can be who they are, and can become who they want to be, and succeed in whatever way is meaningful to them, right? And if that's being a virtuoso violinist, I'm going to figure out how to help that kid do that. And if it's, arranging video game tunes for a recorder and a viola, like, I'm going to help them do that too.
Yeah.
And I think I feel happier doing it that way.
You've given us a lot of things to think about, and I guess I'm not even sure, like, something we do in our book is, things to try tomorrow, and an actionable step. And you've said some of those things. Is there anything now that we've kind of come into an end here that you would, if somebody's like, okay, I want to do more work here, where you would, maybe it's a book, or maybe it's a, well, what would we do?
Yeah, I think the first step is to figure out, are your students speaking, right? Are they using their voices? And if they're not, figure out ways to get them to do that. And that could be the social warm up. And I promise it's awkward at first, like the first 5 times, and then it just blossoms and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And start with that idea, right? And then find ways to embed a little bit more experimentation, right, in your, technique time, in your rehearsal strategies. Ask students how we can try something different ways, and actually take their suggestion, even if it's not going to work, right? Like, that's important. Like, it's important. And by doing those kinds of things, you start to build, right, like, your own competencies, right? You start to open up your own framework a little bit. And I think you reach a point where you can be learning alongside your students, right? And one of the ways that I'm doing that right now that I love, and this is something I would recommend too, is if you find a piece of music that is cultural, right, try and learn it with your students in a totally different way, right? So my youth orchestra is doing Chavez Sinfonia India right now, which includes 3 indigenous melodies from Mexico. And so rather than just kind of learn it from the page, we've been doing all kinds of oral transmission and oral skills, and invented notation and different things. And this piece that I thought was going to be such a major, like haul, because it's just more mixed meter than I've ever seen, like, I thought it was going to be so hard for them. They just like ate it up, like, in a couple of weeks, right? Because we decentered that default lens and let the music kind of speak in the way that it was originally meant to.
I like that. The fact that you emphasize that you're learning alongside of them. That's it's okay for us to do. We don't have to have all the answers.
Absolutely. I can't,
right. I don't.
I can't.
Yep.
Some of my students in youth orchestra in particular play circles around me. How am I supposed to teach you like the techniques? But we can explore like the ideas and the music together,
This has been just incredible. Thank you so much for your time and the ideas and just expertise, passion, all of that. If somebody wanted to learn more, connect with you, all of that good stuff, what can we tell them?
Sure. So I have a personal website that's FelipeMorales-Torres.com if you want to reach out to me directly. And a lot of my work, kind of manifests right now through the foundation. So that's the Bornoff Foundation, at face.org, FASE.org. And I hate to sound like an old man, but like, I share most of my stuff on Facebook. I'll get with it at some point. And use my Instagram and TikTok more, but right now I don't.
Yeah. Good. Well, we'll put links to all of that in the show notes. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Again, this has been great. We appreciate it. And I'm excited just to hear about how the piece goes with the youth orchestra and just all of the good stuff you do this semester.
I might have to choose a new piece. Like it's just it's going too fast.
That's
We're
awesome.
doing other stuff too. But
good problem to have.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. If you have found value in our conversation, please hit that like button, subscribe to our podcast, and leave a review. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us grow our community of passionate music educators.